Megan Q is a senior software engineer at CallRail that loves solving problems with Ruby and helping other developers grow. She works to make technology more accessible to women and people of underrepresented groups in any way she can. Megan also hopes to pet every dog in existence. Megan Q.
Hey everybody, so this is the practical guide to building an apprenticeship. My name is Megan Tew, as he said. I'm an engineer at CallRail in Atlanta in the US, and I'm at Megan Tew on Twitter, GitHub, and most other internet places. And I have the pleasure of giving this talk with y'all today, because last year I got to do something really awesome. At my company CallRail, I got to create an apprenticeship program for entry-level developers and bring new people into the industry. And it's something I'm really proud of. Because I think apprenticeships are a severely underrated part of our professional systems, and I think they deserve more attention for a few reasons. So for one, they fulfill a very real need. With coding boot camps and generally making it easier for more people to learn to code, there are a lot of junior developers out there, but so rarely do we see open junior developer positions. There are a ton of fantastic, eager folks that are just waiting for the opportunity to be seen. And when we do actually see these junior positions, they tend to ask for things like 3 years of experience. There's got to be some kind of role in the middle. Apprenticeships fill that hole. They also help us unify and engage our teams, because when you can rally around the common goal of teaching a new developer, you will become closer together. They also help us create more diverse and inclusive organizations. So historically, the population in tech tends to all look like one kind of person. But more and more, we're seeing juniors that are coming out of schools and that are self-taught, that are members of these groups underrepresented in tech, race or gender. And apprenticeships provide these folks the jump start into long-lasting careers as engineers. So what exactly is an apprenticeship? It's an entry-level position designed for brand new software engineers to sustainably grow their knowledge, establish a solid foundation for their craft, and learn more from their experienced peers. The way this manifested for us at CallRail was a 4-month-long program where the end goal is that we hire on the apprentices after as full software engineers. And a question I tend to get a lot when talking about apprenticeships is how they're different from internships. So internships tend to focus on one specific project, like you might hire an intern to write API docs for you. Internships also tend to imply like the connotation of them doing dirty work. You'll hear things like, oh, just let's make the intern do that. And that's not a thing I like to have in that kind of program. The internships also tend to be shorter term, so perhaps you're hiring a college student intern for 1 semester, and once the semester's over, they leave. Apprenticeships, on the other hand, focus on sustainable growth. So instead of just doing one project, they get exposure to lots of different learning opportunities. Apprenticeships also imply that they'll be honing their craft, because this is an investment in their career. They also tend to be longer term. So our program was 3 or 4 months long, but I've heard of apprenticeships that were up to 1.5 years long. They're much longer programs. So now you know you want an apprenticeship over an internship. It's time to lay the groundwork. So this is all the pitching, planning, and preparation that happens before you can put anything into motion. So what do you need to get it going? 3 things. You need a plan. You need cash, because if you expect someone to dedicate their time and energy to learning and growing at a fast rate, they shouldn't have to worry about putting food on the table. And you also need buy-in. So ideally, the majority of folks in your engineering organization are on board with this project, but really you just need at least enough to rally around and get it running. But the one person that definitely you need buy-in from is your boss. So if you're not the decision maker. And this can range in difficulty depending on the size of your organization. But for-profit companies, they'll likely need to justify the time and the money costs of this program. So you can break that down into material costs. So with apprenticeships, you'll essentially eliminate your onboarding costs. So if you hire your apprentices on afterward as full engineers, you're essentially not having to do any onboarding, because during their apprenticeship phase, they got up to speed and they know exactly what your company is doing. You also eliminate recruiting costs. So many of us know exactly how hard it is to hire engineers, but with apprenticeships, the demand is so great that you will have applicants coming to you in droves instead of having to pay someone else to find candidates for you. It also means easier hire of seniors. So I, as a senior engineer myself, really value in a company the ability to learn and grow, but also help learn and grow other developers. And so this kind of program looks good to me as a senior engineer, right? Like, I want to go to that kind of company. And then we've got the immaterial gains that you'll get from an apprenticeship, like increasing diversity, background and skill, improving your team connectivity, and even increasing developer productivity. Because if you've got a junior and a senior pairing on a problem together, yes, the junior is learning, but two heads are pretty much always better than one in this case, and you'll go a little bit faster. So once you've convinced your boss and you're ready to start, there are a few things you need to decide. So one, program length. How long is it going to be? For us, we chose a 4-month-long program, which actually ended up being more like 3, but I'll touch on that a little later. Number of apprentices. So how many folks do you want to have with you? 1, 2, do you want an entire cohort of people? We chose 2 because that way they could pair programs together, and that was like a manageable number of folks to mentor. And then who's going to do what? So defined roles are really important in a program like this. What we settled on was 1 program director / mentor combo, which is myself, 1 manager to help keep track of their growth and help them succeed, and then multiple people that would help us reviewing applications, reviewing code challenges throughout the hiring process. You also got to decide what you want them to know when they're coming in, what they should learn when they're with you, and how they should learn it. And these things will vary by organization according to your values. But for us, we knew we wanted them to have built web apps before they came to us. We wanted them to know basic programming concepts like control flow. We decided we definitely wanted them to learn refactoring and testing and best practices, but especially confidence in themselves as developers and in their skills. And we decided pair programming would be pretty great for that because it's a great way to transfer knowledge. And we also wanted them to be able to work with many different teams to get exposure to different parts of our code base and different levels of the stack. But what's most important in this prep is that you really, really need a game plan. So I did a ton of research in order to create a very thorough plan before we got started, and never once did I feel like it wasn't necessary. I kept referring back to that original plan throughout the entire program. And this is actually the outline that I used for our plan. It covered things like our goals, who we wanted to target, what they'd be doing through the months that they're with us, what projects they'd be working on, as well as how we were actually going to run the program. And all this planning was very crucial going into the implementation, so actually doing the thing. We broke this down into 3 phases: hiring, onboarding, and growing. So let's talk about hiring. Our goal here was to establish an unbiased, even playing field for our candidates. So this goes back to our overall goal of increasing diversity. And it's so crucial in order to make sure that everyone has an equal shot at a spot in this program. You've got to remove as much bias as possible to be successful. We broke our hiring process into 3 phases: an application, a code challenge, and then a final interview. One important thing to note is that through this entire process, we were able to totally anonymize our candidates. So whenever someone submitted an application to the program, we assigned them a hashed ID, and that was the only way that we identified them all the way up until the final interviews, when we actually had to talk to them face-to-face. So our application, we asked for things like their name, email address, of course. We also asked for a place where we could view their work, like GitHub or a website. But it's important to note that we actually never used that until the tiebreakers going into the final interview phase, because we really didn't want to destroy what we had built up with all that anonymity. We also asked them their familiarity with Ruby and with Rails, just to get a gauge of where they are at technically. And then the bulk of the application was a few different questions to sort of gauge what kind of developers they are, what they're looking for in the program, and how we can best serve them. We asked things like, what does your background bring to the table? And in the application, we very specifically said, we are looking for someone with little to no professional development experience. And despite that fact, candidates consistently tried to make up for the fact that they were at the beginning of their careers. This problem is so bad with lack of junior positions that people were constantly tripping over themselves to justify where they were, which isn't okay. It was very eye-opening for us in this process. My favorite question that we asked was for them to tell us about a problem that challenged them in their learning process and learning to code, how they ultimately conquered it. And this was a fantastic question and really helped us in our decision-making process. Because the worst answers, weeded out candidates that just didn't put any effort into the process, like, I don't know, shrug, I just pushed through. But the best answers were fantastic because we got to see step-by-step their thought processes and how they worked through problems and how they debugged. It was a fantastic question that we loved. To review the applications, we created a standardized rubric to remove as much bias from the process as possible. At the top, you could see we have a slot for their candidate ID. We also asked our reviewers things like, how far along the learning process are they? Just to get an idea of who we're working with. Our reviewers also reviewed each application on 3 different traits that we could gauge from their answers. So eagerness and excitement, curiosity, and drive. And they rated those on a numerical scale of 1 to 6, so that there were no easy outs by picking that middle number. You had to take an actual stance on each candidate's traits. And that numerical data actually helped us do some really cool stuff. We got to totally make data-driven hiring decisions. So an example would be if a candidate consistently scored high in their reviews across multiple reviewers, we'd go ahead and push that person through to the next round without having to discuss it again, because the data showed that they were a good candidate. And the same on the converse. If they got low scores among multiple reviewers, we said, hey, maybe they're not the fit for this program, and didn't move them to the next round. After the application was the code challenge, and how we did it. So first, we had to decide what we wanted to know from the code challenge. So we knew that we wanted them to be able to write control flow. We wanted to give them an opportunity to write idiomatic Ruby, things like that. Then we had to figure out what format we wanted. So I decided that a TDD-style task would be pretty interesting. So we gave them a file of failing tests, and then they had to write code to make them pass. Then we had to actually write the code challenge, which is way easier said than done. If you've ever written a code challenge, it's actually really hard to reverse engineer what we thought candidates were capable of, and then leave additional room for them to go above and beyond. So that was actually pretty difficult. But we gave each candidate their own GitHub repository. We gave each candidate their own GitHub repository that they could push to master when they were finished. And it was a program called Grader. So Grader helped teachers grade multiple choice tests and then gain insights into how their students are performing. And we tacked on a pretty extensive README. For example, we figured out that for many of our applicants, because of the code school programs in the Atlanta area, wouldn't have worked with automated testing before. So we made sure to include very detailed instructions on what running our spec tests looked like in your terminal so that they knew they were on the right track. We also gave them 2 Ruby files. So one was just an empty class grader where they'd be writing all their code. And then we gave them a file full of our spec tests so that they could then work backwards and figure out what code that they should be writing. We specifically try to use some techniques that they wouldn't be familiar with, like hoisting with lets, just so that they could learn a bit as they even went through our code challenge. And that was a pretty big success. we received feedback from candidates that they really enjoyed that, being able to actually learn even within the confines of a test. You'll also note that we left code comments to sort of give context to that situation. And we realized that that was super crucial because these code comments that we left are the only context that our candidates had when going into this challenge. All they have is what you give them, so you've got to set them up for success as much as possible. And how we anonymize our code challenges was actually really cool. So we wrote a script to scrub the commit's author info and then submitted a pull request on a separate submissions-only repository that only associated with their candidate ID. And this was fantastic for us because it got to preserve our candidates' commit history without risking identifying our candidates. So if they submitted all their code in one commit, we could see that. And if they were the kind of person to have multiple commits and show step-by-step what they were doing as they worked, we could see that as well. And that was really helpful in the review. And the PR format really worked for us too. So as our company uses GitHub's built-in code review tools, reading PRs just felt natural for our reviewers, and we feel like they got the best results because they didn't have to worry about the tool that they were using. They just got to read code on GitHub like they're used to. And the way we reviewed code challenges was pretty similar to the applications. We used a similar rubric to standardize that review. Ask things like, can they use control flow? Or do they seem like they're comfortable with Ruby? We also asked our reviewers to provide feedback for the candidates. We knew that for many of these juniors, they had never received any code review from anyone before. And we really wanted this program to be an investment in our community's juniors. So we provided a place to give them actionable feedback, whether or not they went through to the next round or not. So after the code challenge was the final interview. And what's cool is that this is actually the first time we've been able to put names and faces to the application and code that they've submitted, which was a big one for us, we felt. And we broke our final interviews down into 3 sections as well. So a product and company intro, where they got to learn who we are, what we do, and how we do it. And then technical and behavioral conversations. And the technical chat was a little bit different than it would normally be for hiring an experienced developer, because you can't really use the same terms or questions and just automatically know that they're going to understand what you're talking about. So we used the code challenge as a focal point because it's code that we had both seen and could easily talk about. So I got to ask them things like, what challenged you while you're doing this code challenge? And this let us see how they worked through problems and how that was then later reflected in their submission. We also asked or used the feedback from the code challenge review and gave that to them in the interview to see how they reacted to feedback and then see how they ask questions as they're processing. And then the behavioral conversation was a bit more like standard job interview type questions, but one unique thing we got to ask for our apprentices is what they changed about the school that they went to, be it a code school or university or even a self-directed program. And this was fantastic for us because it gave us an idea of what their needs are and then how best we could serve that candidate going into the program. Ways we'd improve our hiring process is to use an HR platform. We essentially rolled our own using Google Forms and Docs and Sheets. And so I spent a lot of time in G Suite over the course of the hiring process. But that energy probably could have been spent better in the actual program than necessarily in the hiring. I'd also recommend not to limit your code challenge to one programming language. So at CallRail, all our server-side application code is in Ruby, and I'm a Ruby developer, so that's all I knew. And as the person writing the code challenge, that felt natural. But we received some applications from PHP developers and JavaScript developers that were fantastic candidates, but once they got to the code challenge step, were a little too challenged by the fact that it was in Ruby and maybe couldn't quite overcome that. And we might have lost out on some fantastic candidates as apprentices. I also recommend to be really direct with your application questions. So they're just trying to answer the question that you gave them and not some hidden meaning. So make sure that you ask specifically for what you want to know and not try to bury it at all. So we hired 2 fantastic apprentices, and it was time to onboard them. Our goals for onboarding were to set these apprentices up for success and to teach them the essential concepts that they needed throughout the program and in their careers beyond. And we felt it important to give them the same onboarding experience as the rest of our developers so that they were getting essentially the same info. And this included info sessions on different applications that we have and how they communicate, as well as important parts of our code base and things like that. But one unique thing for the apprentices that we were able to do was a scavenger hunt. So we gave them questions like, what's the name of the controller action where this thing happens? And then they could use the context clues inside the question to then find the answer in the code. And this was great because our code base is bigger than our apprentices had ever seen before. And so this was a very chill, relaxed way to become familiar with our production code base. In addition to our regular info sessions, we added on some lessons on foundational concepts like object-oriented programming and debugging. These are things that we generally expect our senior developers to have when they're coming in, but juniors don't. So we wanted to make sure they had that up front. Ways to improve the onboarding process. So I would definitely recommend giving them early exposure to any practices that your team may have, like sprint planning or point estimation. Once our apprentices got to the team rotation phase of the program, they got the question, what's a sprint? And that's fair, they wouldn't have known what a sprint was otherwise if we hadn't told them first. But definitely recommend doing that up front. And once they've been onboarded, it's time to grow your apprentices. So our goals here are to anticipate their needs, provide an inclusive and friendly environment to grow and learn, and to increase apprentice independence. Because I believe independence is one of the best indicators of growth in a developer. So it's important for us to enable them there. And we broke our growth phase into 2 different sections. So first, we had an initial ramping up period where they worked on smaller projects like bug fixes and some internal-facing work. And this was in order for them to build up confidence and build up their skills at the same time. Once they ramped up, they did multiple rotations with different teams working on customer-facing product work. And this was fantastic because it gave them exposure to multiple ways teams ran their teams, multiple exposure to different parts of the code base, as well as exposure to different levels of the stack, so they could understand what they actually like. And this sort of ramping up showed them how the larger projects that they did in the latter portions of the program are made up of the smaller ones that they did in the beginning. We also made sure to set early expectations for our apprentices. So if they were going to be hired on at the end of the program as full engineers, we told them, here is our role sheet, here's what we expect for our software engineer ones, or our equivalent of the junior engineer. And this included, and we wanted them to check all or at least most of these boxes by the time that they're finished with the program in order to be hired. So this includes things like personally verify that your changes work as intended, and lean on the expertise of your coworkers to improve your work. We also made sure to establish regular communication with the apprentices. So I, as their mentor, had weekly one-on-ones with them to keep track on how they're doing, and then have a very open space for them to come to me with any questions or concerns that they might have had. They also had regular one-on-ones with their manager to sort of help them along that role sheet and keep them progressing and making sure that they were doing well. We also felt it really important to involve them in the decisions on which teams they'd be rotating on, because we realized they will be learning and growing the best if they're doing things that they actually enjoy. And then this also helps them figure out things that they do enjoy, be it different technologies or different parts of the stack. And finally, the most important is that you can't be afraid to let them fail. There will absolutely come a time when you're pair programming with an apprentice and they'll say, hey, what if we tried this? And you'll think, that would fail. But you can't say that, right? You've got to sit on your hands, shut your mouth, and say, yeah, let's give that a shot. Because the only way for them to really learn is to give it a shot, see that error message, and then understand how it happened and how they can fix it. Ways we'd improve our growth phase. So look for early warning signs and then be proactive about intervening when you find them. So juniors have a much harder time admitting that they're struggling because they don't really feel like they own their role yet. And this is something I've seen consistently across working with junior developers in the community as well. So make sure you're able to recognize those warning signs and support them as necessary. You also want to make sure that everyone involved is on the same page regarding the expectations you have for your apprentices. So we ran into a situation where once they started the team rotation phase, one of the team leads voiced the concern that they didn't really know what their apprentice knew or what they were supposed to be teaching them. And so our fix here for this next time is to keep basically a rubric of things that they should learn while they're with us, and then keep track of that, and then give that to the team leads as they go. It's a pretty easy fix, but definitely something that's very important to do. So, to wrap up, we planned a fantastic program. We hired 2 stellar apprentices. We onboarded them and set them up for success, and then we grew them into fantastic engineers. Our results with this program, I'm really happy to say that we hired on both of our apprentices afterward. They've been with us for about 6 months now, and they're both productive members of their teams. Their teams wouldn't want to be without them at all, and that's something I'm really proud of. They've done fantastically. Some lessons we've learned in this process. So when you're hiring, make sure to listen to any early hunches that you have about these candidates. So in the application phase, we had one candidate that was potentially a little overconfident to the point that would hinder collaboration. And we try not to have too big of egos on our teams, right? But the rest of their application was pretty strong. So we pushed them through, and they got through the code challenge as well. But once we interviewed them in the final phase, that early hunch turned out to be true. They were a little bit cockier than maybe we would have liked to hire. And that was pretty true across multiple candidates. So even the folks that we hired on, the original thoughts we had about them in their application were correct as we worked with them. So make sure to go with your gut. You also want to give yourself lots of time for this process. So our program was greenlit last year in about late May, and we sat down to plan and realized that in order to end before Christmas, we had to actually shorten our program from 4 months to 3. Because this planning and preparation and hiring does actually take a long time in addition to the program. You also want to always make sure you work with your goals in mind. It will be really, really tempting to do things an easier way or the way that someone else asks you to do. But you've got to remember that you are in this to make a very real impact. We were able to provide full-time jobs that pay a living wage and include full benefits for an entry-level position. And that was huge. We were so proud. And these jobs are the kind of small change that can become something bigger. It's our opportunity to make big change on a small scale. We say we want to bring different kinds of people into this industry. We say we want to value education and growth in our organizations. We say we want to help junior developers and that we want to give back. This is a concrete way to do all of those things. So go start an apprenticeship. Thank you. Again, I'm Megan Tew, at Megan Tew on Twitter and GitHub. I really want to thank real quick these amazing folks that helped me either during the research phase of my program or actually getting it done at the company. Please feel free to come and chat with me about apprenticeships. I could literally talk about them all day. Salamat po.
Hello. We probably have time for just one question.
Anybody?
Did you achieve the goal of increasing diversity?
Yes, we did. We hired both of our apprentices were people of color. One of them was a woman, and we were super happy about that. And because our process was totally anonymous, we knew that wasn't just because, that's what we were looking for or anything like that. It was because they were actually the best candidates that came through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. If you had have found that the two best candidates were 20-something white males, would you have had a tinge of perhaps feeling like the program had failed? Or
I wouldn't necessarily have felt like it failed. I would have been maybe a little surprised, but we are really happy with our process and the way we were able to be extremely thorough, no matter what the result was. So we're just happy at the way it turned out, I guess.
Thanks very much.
All right, thank you. Oh yeah.
Megan, great talk.
Thank you.
Quick question on the follow-up or the review that you did for the people involved during the full interview process.
Mm-hmm.
Did you get feedback from the candidates about how they felt about their interview, and what are the processes you followed to improve the interviewing process itself?
Right. So the question was about how we got feedback. We, as best as we could, during their final interviews, we asked candidates for very specific questions, like not like what they thought of the code challenge or how they worked through things, and what their answers were, even in consideration for the role, were things we still use to give feedback. Overall, we heard good things about our code challenge, about our application. We didn't ask for any additional feedback from candidates that we didn't select to go into final interviews, just because we didn't want to necessarily waste their time or anything like that. But that's definitely a plan in the next round, so we can continue to further grow.
Thanks.
Thank y'all.
Okay. Thank you.